How do you hide an invasion when the entire world knows where it must come next? In April 1943, a body washed ashore on the Spanish coast. Chained to the wrist of a dead British officer was a briefcase containing documents so sensitive, so explosive, that they would redirect Hitler's entire Mediterranean strategy. The documents revealed Allied plans to invade Greece and Sardinia. They confirmed German suspicions. They aligned with every piece of intelligence the Abwehr had gathered. There was only one problem. Every word was a lie. The officer didn't exist. The documents were forgeries. And the corpse itself was a prop in the most audacious military deception of World War II. A theatrical performance so convincing that it would save 15,000 lives and determine the fate of an entire campaign. This is the story of Operation Mincemeat. The dead man who fooled Hitler, the brilliant minds who staged his death, and how a single body became the most important weapon in the Battle of Sicily. April 30th, 1943. The coast of Spain. A fisherman makes a discovery that will change the course of the war. This is that story. Background. To understand why the Allies needed a dead body, you must first understand the strategic dilemma they faced in early 1943. North Africa had fallen to Allied forces. After years of brutal desert warfare, Rommel's Africa Corps had been decisively defeated at El Alamein in November 1942. By May 13th, 1943, the last Axis troops in Tunisia surrendered. Over 275,000 German and Italian soldiers became prisoners of war. The Mediterranean southern shore now belonged to the Allies. The question facing Churchill, Roosevelt, and their military commanders was simple but critical. Where do we strike next? The answer was obvious to everyone, fatally, dangerously obvious. Sicily. The island sat like a stepping stone between North Africa and the Italian mainland, just 90 miles across the Strait of Messina. It was the only logical target for an invasion. Any military planner could see it, which meant German military planners could see it too. And that presented an existential problem. Operation Husky, the code name for the Sicily invasion, would be the largest amphibious assault yet attempted in the war. The plan called for 160,000 men in the initial landing force, supported by 3,000 ships and 4,000 aircraft. It would dwarf even the Dieppe raid and would not be exceeded in scale until the Normandy landings a year later. But if the Germans knew where the blow would fall, they could concentrate their defenses and turn the beaches into killing grounds. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, the shrewd commander of German forces in the Mediterranean, had already begun reinforcing Sicily. By June 1943, the island's garrison would number approximately 230,000 Italian troops and 40,000 German soldiers, including the formidable Hermann Göring Panzer Division and the elite 15th Panzer Grenadier Division. Allied intelligence estimated that a fully prepared defense could inflict catastrophic casualties, perhaps 15,000 dead in the opening days alone. The invasion could fail before it truly began. The Allies needed the Germans looking somewhere else, anywhere else. That mission fell to a small, shadowy organization few had heard of, and whose very existence was classified at the highest levels. The London Controlling Section, headed by Lieutenant Colonel John Bevan, was tasked with strategic deception across all theaters. In the Mediterranean, the man responsible for fooling the Germans was Lieutenant Colonel Dudley Clark, commander of a force, a deception unit operating from Cairo. Clark was a master of illusion. Since 1941, his team had created phantom armies, staged fake invasions, and fed the Germans a steady diet of misinformation. His methods combined physical deception, signals intelligence manipulation, and human intelligence operations into what he called strategic deception, making the enemy see not just what wasn't there, but making them believe in entire realities that existed only in carefully crafted lies. For Sicily, Clark developed an ambitious plan called Operation Barclay, a multi-layered deception that would convince the Germans the Allies intended to invade Greece and Sardinia simultaneously, with Sicily serving merely as a diversionary feint. But Barclay needed something more. Something that would tie all the deception threads together with one unassailable piece of evidence. It needed a body. The sub-operation that would deliver that body had a grimly appropriate codename: Operation Mincemeat. The concept was brilliantly simple. If a British courier carrying highly classified invasion plans died in an aircraft accident over the Mediterranean and his body washed ashore in neutral Spain, a country known to share intelligence with Germany, the documents would inevitably reach German hands. If those documents seemed authentic enough, urgent enough, secret enough, they could confirm what all the other deception efforts were suggesting. But everything depended on the Germans believing the body was real. And for that, they would need to build not just a corpse, but an entire human being. Building tension. The man who never existed began to take shape in a series of secret meetings in early 1943. Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley of RAF Intelligence and Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague of Naval Intelligence, both members of the 20 committee that ran British double agents, developed the operational details. The body they needed had to meet specific criteria. It had to be a man of military age who had died recently enough that decomposition hadn't progressed too far. The cause of death had to be consistent with drowning, or at least couldn't obviously contradict it, since pathologists in Spain might examine the corpse. Finding such a body proved remarkably difficult. The dead don't often cooperate with military operations. Finally, in January 1943, they found their man. Glyndwr Michael was a 34-year-old homeless man from Wales who had died in an abandoned warehouse after eating rat poison containing phosphorus. The coroner ruled it suicide, though some believed it might have been accidental. Michael had no family, no close friends, no one who would ask questions. In death, he would serve his country in ways he never could in life. The body was placed in cold storage to preserve it while the team developed his new identity. He would become Major William Martin, Royal Marines, service number 148-228. But a name wasn't enough. To fool German intelligence, Major Martin needed a life, a complete, believable existence that would survive the most intense scrutiny. Montague and his team became biographers of a fictional man. They created identity documents, military ID card, pass for Combined Operations Headquarters, membership cards for the Naval and Military Club. Each was authentic, produced by the same government offices that made real ones. But the genius was in the personal details. They filled Major Martin's wallet with the debris of a life. Ticket stubs from a London theater dated April 22, 1943, just days before his supposed death. A receipt from a jeweler for an engagement ring costing $53. 2 love letters from his fiancée, Pam, written on scented stationery, filled with the kind of intimate details that no forger would think to invent. Complaints about her father, mentions of mutual friends, playful arguments about wedding plans. These letters were written by a clerk in Montague's office, deliberately crafted to seem real precisely because they focused on mundane relationship concerns rather than anything military. They added a photograph of Pam, actually a clerk from MI5 who would never know her picture, accompanied a corpse across the Mediterranean. They included a stern letter from Martin's bank manager regarding his overdraft. 79, and 19 shillings. Overdrawn. Nothing makes a person seem more real than being in debt. The final touch was perhaps the most audacious. They placed in his pocket a used ticket stub from the Café Royal and a receipt for the engagement ring, dated April 19th, suggesting Martin had been in London just days before his supposed death on April 24th. Every detail reinforced the narrative. This was a real officer, recently engaged, perhaps celebrating with his fiancée before departing on a mission, carrying sensitive documents he shouldn't have been carrying. A security breach, but an understandable human error. Now came the documents themselves, the actual bait that would hook German intelligence. The centerpiece was a personal letter from Lieutenant General Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Harold Alexander, Commander of Allied forces in North Africa and the Mediterranean. The letter was a masterwork of deceptive writing. It discussed in seemingly casual terms the upcoming invasions, plural, of the Mediterranean. It mentioned that Alexander would command the invasion of Sicily, but framed it explicitly as a cover operation, a feint designed to draw German attention away from the real targets: Operation Husky in Greece and Operation Brimstone in Sardinia. The letter included operational details that seemed far too specific to be fabricated. It mentioned concerns about landing craft availability, coordination between American and British forces, and even personal gossip about command appointments. Critically, it was written in the informal style of one senior officer to another, not an official operational order, but a personal correspondence that happened to contain sensitive information. This made it simultaneously more believable and more damaging if intercepted. A second letter from Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten to Admiral Andrew Cunningham reinforced the deception with technical details about amphibious warfare equipment and mentioned Major Martin by name, establishing his credentials as a trusted courier. The documents were typed on authentic military stationery, signed with real signatures, obtained through careful forgery, and sealed in an official briefcase that was chained to Martin's wrist, standard procedure for sensitive courier duties. But the most subtle element of the deception was what the documents didn't say. They never stated explicitly, "We are not invading Sicily." That would have been too obvious, too suspicious. Instead, they presented Sicily as a real operation, but a secondary one, a diversion. This approach was far more credible because it acknowledged what German intelligence already suspected while reframing its importance. By March 1943, the body, the identity, and the documents were ready. Now came the question of delivery. The body had to wash ashore in a location where Spanish authorities would find it, where German intelligence had strong networks, and where the currents and tides would make the story believable. They chose Huelva, Spain, a small coastal town in Andalusia, where the German vice consul, Adolf Klaus, was known to be an active Abwehr agent. Spanish authorities in the area had a history of cooperating with German intelligence. But the science of the deception had to be perfect. Major Martin couldn't simply be dumped in the ocean. The body's condition, clothing, and position had to be consistent with someone who had died in an aircraft crash at sea and drifted for days before washing ashore. The Royal Navy's submarine HMS Seraph was selected for the mission. On April 19, 1943, the submarine departed from Holyloch, Scotland, carrying a large canister marked optical instruments that actually contained the refrigerated body of Glinder Michael, now fully dressed as Major Martin. Lieutenant Norman Jewell commanded the submarine. Only he and a few officers knew the true nature of their cargo. The crew was told they were delivering weather monitoring equipment. The submarine traveled south, carefully avoiding detection, following a precise route calculated to reach the drop point off Huelva at exactly the right time. Timing was everything. Drop the body too early, and decomposition would progress beyond what was consistent with the cover story. Too late, and the invasion fleet gathering in North Africa might reveal the truth before the deception could take effect. By April 29th, HMS Seraph had reached the designated position, approximately 2,600 meters off the coast of Huelva. At 4:30 a.m. on April 30th, 1943, under cover of darkness, Lieutenant Jewell ordered the submarine to surface. The canister was brought on deck. Officers removed the body and completed the final staging. They inflated a Mae West life jacket around the corpse, standard RAF equipment that would explain how the body stayed afloat. The briefcase was secured with a chain to the belt of the trench coat Martin wore over his Royal Marines uniform. Ewan Montague, in his later account, described this moment with dark humor. I felt rather like a stage manager on opening night. They carefully placed the body in the water, positioning it to drift naturally toward shore with the incoming tide. Lieutenant Jewell gave a brief prayer, a moment of respect for Glinder Michael, the man whose anonymous death was about to serve an extraordinary purpose. The submarine submerged and departed, leaving Major William Martin floating in the dark Atlantic waters. Now everything depended on whether a fisherman would find the body before the currents carried it away, and whether the Germans would believe what they found. The crisis. At approximately 9:30 a.m. on April 30th, 1943, a Spanish sardine fisherman named José Antonio Rey Maria spotted something floating near the shore off Punta Umbria, just north of Huelva. As his small boat approached, he realized with horror what he was seeing. A body, face down in the water, wearing a military uniform, a briefcase chained to the wrist. Rey Maria pulled the corpse aboard his vessel and immediately notified Spanish authorities. By noon, the body had been transferred to Spanish naval authorities in Huelva. The local coroner, Eduardo del Torno, was called to examine it. Del Torno noted that the body appeared to have been in the water for several days, consistent with death by drowning following an aircraft accident. The state of decomposition, while significant, was not inconsistent with the timeline. The documents in the wallet established identity: Major William Martin, Royal Marines. More importantly, Del Torno observed the briefcase, still chained to the body's wrist, marked with official British military seals. Spanish authorities immediately recognized the sensitivity of what they had discovered. A British military officer carrying what appeared to be classified documents had died in Spanish territorial waters. Naval Judge Francisco Elvira took custody of the body and, critically, the briefcase. Within hours, word reached Adolf Klaus, the German vice consul in Huelva, exactly as British intelligence had hoped. But now came the most delicate phase of the operation. British intelligence had to respond in a way that was believable, showing concern about the documents without appearing so desperate that the Spanish became suspicious. The British consul in Huelva, Francis Haselden, made immediate but measured inquiries about the body. He requested its return and asked about any personal effects, but he did not specifically demand the briefcase, which would have drawn attention to it. Behind the scenes, the British embassy in Madrid applied diplomatic pressure, insisting that all documents be returned unopened as a matter of military security and international protocol. This pressure had to be carefully calibrated. Too little, and the Spanish might not bother to examine the documents. Too much, and they might suspect a deception and refuse to cooperate with German intelligence. The Spanish played their role perfectly, because they weren't acting. Spanish military intelligence, while officially neutral, maintained close relationships with German intelligence. The documents were too valuable not to examine. On May the 1st, before the British could collect the body and briefcase, Spanish intelligence officers carefully opened the sealed letters. They photographed every page. The photographs were developed immediately, and copies were prepared for German intelligence, delivered to Adolf Klaus within 24 hours of the body's discovery. Klaus recognized the potential significance immediately. He transmitted a coded message to Abwehr headquarters in Berlin. Documents of utmost importance regarding Allied Mediterranean operations recovered from British courier. Full contents being forwarded. On May 3rd, Major Martin's body was released to British authorities and buried with full military honors in the Huelva cemetery. Another detail that reinforced the authenticity of the deception. The British even sent a wreath to the funeral, but by then the documents were already in Berlin, and the fate of Operation Husky now depended on a single question. Would Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, believe what he was reading? The documents landed on Canaris's desk on May 5, 1943. The admiral was no fool. He had run German military intelligence since 1935 and had survived in that position through a combination of competence and political acumen. He was known for his careful, skeptical approach to intelligence analysis. He assembled his best analysts to examine the Huelva documents. The first question was obvious. Were they authentic? The analysts examined every detail. The paper was correct. Official British military stationery with proper watermarks. The typewriter fonts matched known British military machines. The signatures appeared genuine, matching exemplars German intelligence had of Nye's and Mountbatten's handwriting. More importantly, the content itself seemed authentic. The letters contained the kind of casual, informal language that senior officers used in personal correspondence, not the stilted, formal prose of official documents. They included personal gossip, complaints about administrative matters, casual references to shared acquaintances. These were not the kinds of details a forger would think to include. But Canaris was troubled by one element. The letters seemed almost too revealing. Would a vice chief of the Imperial General Staff really discuss invasion plans in a personal letter, even to another senior commander? His analysts debated the point. Some argued it was precisely this informal channel that made the letters valuable. Officers trying to communicate sensitive information outside official channels to avoid bureaucratic delays. Others noted that the British had a reputation for casual security practices among senior officers, who often discussed matters informally that should have been confined to formal channels. The analysts examined the physical evidence as well. The Spanish coroner's report indicated the body had been in the water for 3 to 5 days, consistent with an aircraft accident around April 25th, 27th. The personal effects, the theater tickets, the love letters, the bank overdraft notice, all seemed genuine. German intelligence even cross-referenced the name Major William Martin with other sources. They found references in intercepted radio traffic to a Martin attached to combined operations, exactly what the documents indicated. What they didn't know was that British intelligence had deliberately inserted those radio references as part of the broader deception. The analysts compiled a report for Canaris. Their conclusion: while some elements seemed convenient, the weight of evidence suggested the documents were genuine. But Canaris needed more than document analysis. He needed confirmation from other intelligence sources. This is where Operation Barclay, the broader Mediterranean deception plan, became critical. German aerial reconnaissance had been observing a massive military buildup in eastern Mediterranean ports, exactly where an invasion force targeting Greece would stage. Dozens of landing craft, supply ships, and transport vessels were clearly visible. What German reconnaissance didn't realize was that most of those vessels were canvas fakes, built by theatrical set designers working for Dudley Clark's A-Force. German signals intelligence had intercepted radio traffic indicating the formation of the British 12th Army, an entire army group preparing for operations in the eastern Mediterranean. Units were requesting supplies, filing movement reports, conducting communications drills. What signals intelligence didn't know was that the radio traffic was being generated by phantom operators, each playing a role, creating fictional units that existed only in radio waves. German agents in neutral countries, Turkey, Spain, Portugal, were reporting preparations for Greek operations. Soldiers were being issued Greek-language phrase books. Greek currency was being printed in large quantities. Cold weather equipment was being stockpiled for mountain warfare. All of these reports were being fed by double agents controlled by British intelligence. Every piece of independent intelligence seemed to confirm what the Huelva documents claimed. Greece and Sardinia were the targets. Sicily was a feint. On May 9, 1943, Canaris met with his senior staff to make a final determination. The case for authenticity was compelling. Multiple independent sources corroborated the documents. The physical evidence was consistent. The content, while sensitive, didn't seem impossibly convenient. Against this, only a vague sense of unease, a feeling that perhaps it was all slightly too perfect. Canaris made his decision. On May 12th, he drafted his assessment for transmission to Hitler's headquarters. Documents recovered in Spain from British courier confirmed genuine. Allied invasion plans target Greece, Operation Husky, and Sardinia, Operation Brimstone. Sicily appears to be cover operation. The report went to Hitler's Situation Room on May 14, 1943. Adolf Hitler read the assessment and reviewed the supporting intelligence. His response was immediate and decisive. Hitler had long believed the Allies would target the Balkans. It aligned with his strategic worldview. The Huelva documents confirmed his intuition. He ordered immediate redeployment of forces. The 1st Panzer Division, then stationed in France, would move to Greece. Coastal defenses in the Peloponnese would be reinforced. Minefields would be expanded. Artillery positions strengthened. In Sardinia, the Italian garrison was brought to full strength with German liaison officers arriving to coordinate defenses. And in Sicily was to maintain its current defensive posture but not receive priority reinforcement. The Germans were looking the wrong way. Dudley Clark received confirmation through Ultra Intercepts, the top-secret British program that had broken German military codes. By late May, intercepts showed German units moving to Greece and Sardinia. References to Sicily appeared only in the context of a potential diversionary operation. The deception had worked. But now came the most dangerous month of all, because maintaining the illusion until the actual invasion launched required even more delicate work than creating it. The turning point. Through June 1943, as the massive Allied invasion fleet assembled in North African ports, the deception team worked frantically to maintain the illusion. Every day brought new risks. The sheer scale of Operation Husky made secrecy nearly impossible. Over 160,000 men were now loading onto ships, thousands of vehicles, tanks, artillery pieces, supply crates, all pointing obviously towards Sicily. German reconnaissance aircraft flew regular missions over North Africa. Any one of them might photograph evidence that contradicted the mincemeat deception. The solution was not to hide the buildup. That was impossible. But to frame it within the deception narrative. Clark's team ensured that dummy landing craft remained visible in eastern Mediterranean ports facing Greece. Radio traffic for the Phantom 12th Army intensified, suggesting an imminent invasion. False weather reports were transmitted for Greek coastal conditions. Most critically, the actual invasion fleet was portrayed in German intelligence assessments as a diversionary force. Significant, but not the main effort. British intelligence monitored German dispositions through ultra-intercepts and other sources. The intelligence painted a clear picture. German mobile reserves remained concentrated in Greece and Sardinia. Sicily's garrison was strong but not receiving the reinforcements that would make it impregnable. On July 3, 1943, Ewan Montagu received a message from the British Embassy in Madrid. Spanish authorities had finally returned Major Martin's briefcase to British control, weeks after the body had been buried. Montagu and his team examined it with microscopic care. They had embedded tiny fibers and hairs in the document seals, invisible markers that would show if the envelopes had been opened and resealed. Every single marker had been disturbed. The documents had been opened, photographed, and carefully replaced. The Spanish had done exactly what British intelligence hoped they would do, and then they had tried to hide that they had done it. It was the final confirmation. The documents had reached German intelligence. The deception was complete. Now everything depended on the invasion itself. The night of July 9, 1943, was moonless, deliberately chosen for the reduced visibility it would provide to the invasion fleet. Over 2,500 ships departed from ports across North Africa: Alexandria, Tripoli, Sousse, Sfax, Bizerte. The largest armada yet assembled in the Mediterranean, carrying 160,000 men of the British 8th Army and the American 7th Army. The fleet sailed through darkness, maintaining radio silence, hoping that German reconnaissance would miss them until it was too late. German coastal observers in Sicily did detect the approaching armada in the early hours of July 10th. Emergency alerts went out to all units, but the response was confused, delayed, insufficient. Because the mobile reserves that could have thrown the invasion back into the sea, the crack panzer divisions, the motorized infantry, the concentrated artillery, were in Greece and Sardinia, guarding beaches that would never be attacked. At 2:45 a.m. on July 10th, the first wave of Allied troops hit the beaches. American forces under Major General George Patton landed in the Gulf of Gila on Sicily's southern coast. The British 8th Army under General Bernard Montgomery struck beaches between Syracuse and Cape Passero on the southeastern tip. The initial resistance was lighter than feared, though still deadly. Italian coastal divisions, poorly equipped and demoralized, surrendered in large numbers. Many Italian soldiers had little will to fight for a fascist regime that was clearly losing the war. German units fought harder. The Hermann Göring Panzer Division launched counterattacks at Gela, pushing American forces back toward the beaches in some sectors. For several hours, the outcome hung in balance, but without the concentrated reserves that should have been available, without the 1st Panzer Division that was in Greece, without the additional divisions that were guarding Sardinia, the German counterattacks lacked the weight to succeed. By the end of July 10th, Allied forces had established secure beachheads across 150 kilometers of coastline. The feared slaughter had not materialized. In the first 48 hours of the invasion, Allied casualties numbered approximately 2,000 killed and 6,000 wounded. Tragic losses, but far below the worst-case projections. Military historians would later estimate that if German forces had been concentrated on Sicily instead of dispersed across the Mediterranean, casualties in the first week could easily have exceeded 15,000 dead. The deception had saved lives, thousands of them, As Allied forces pushed inland and German commanders recognized that Sicily was indeed the main invasion target, they began repositioning forces. But by then, it was too late. The beachheads were secure. Reinforcements were flowing ashore. The invasion was succeeding. Field Marshal Kesselring would later write in his memoirs about the masterful Allied deception that had misdirected German defenses. He never learned the full details, never knew about the body washed ashore in Spain, never knew about Major William Martin. The Phantom Major had done his job. In Cairo, Dudley Clark received reports of the invasion's success with quiet satisfaction. His phantom armies had played their role perfectly and now disappeared as suddenly as they had appeared. In London, Ewan Montague and Charles Cholmondeley read the casualty reports with profound relief. Their elaborate fiction had achieved its purpose. And in a cemetery in Huelva, Spain, a gravestone marked the resting place of Major William Martin, Royal Marines, a man who never existed, but who had changed the course of the war. Resolution and Legacy Operation. Mincemeat remained classified for decades after the war ended. Ewan Montague finally revealed the operation's details in his 1953 book, The Man Who Never Was, though even then some details remained classified. The book became a bestseller and was adapted into a successful film in 1956. But it would be the 1970s before the full scope of the deception became public, when official files were declassified and the complete integration of Mincemeat with the broader Operation Barclay was revealed. Glyndwr Michael's true identity remained secret until 1996, when archival research finally identified him as the man behind Major Martin. His family had never known that their lost relative had played such a crucial role in the war. In 1998, a new plaque was placed at his grave in Huelva, acknowledging both identities. Glyndwr Michael served as Major William Martin, RM. The Sicily campaign itself lasted until August 17, 1943, when the last German forces evacuated across the Strait of Messina to mainland Italy. Total Allied casualties for the entire campaign reached approximately 20,000, including 5,500 dead. But the deception had achieved its primary purpose. The initial invasion succeeded without the catastrophic losses that a fully prepared defense would have inflicted. The strategic consequences extended far beyond Sicily itself. The successful invasion forced Italy's surrender in September 1943. Mussolini was deposed and arrested. The Allies gained bases for bombing campaigns against Germany and occupied Europe. A second front was opened, forcing Germany to divert resources from the Eastern Front and the Atlantic Wall. Perhaps more importantly, Operation Mincemeat validated the entire concept of strategic deception on a massive scale. It proved that careful, coordinated deception operations could deceive even the most sophisticated intelligence services. The techniques pioneered in Mincemeat and Barclay were refined and expanded for Operation Fortitude, the deception plan for D-Day that convinced Hitler the Normandy landings were a feint and the real invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais. Fortitude kept German panzer divisions frozen in place for weeks after June 6, 1944, allowing Allied forces to establish their Normandy beachhead just as the Sicily deception had enabled Operation Husky. Dudley Clark retired from the military in 1947 with the rank of brigadier. His contributions remained largely unknown during his lifetime. He died in 1974, just as the full story of his wartime deceptions was beginning to emerge. Ewan Montague had a distinguished post-war legal career, becoming a judge. He was appointed Queen's Counsel in 1952 and later became a judge advocate. He died in 1985, having seen his creation become one of the most celebrated intelligence operations in history. The intelligence techniques developed during these operations creating elaborate cover stories, building complete false identities, coordinating multiple deception channels to reinforce a single narrative became standard doctrine in modern intelligence services. Today, Operation Mincemeat is studied at intelligence schools and military colleges worldwide as a masterclass in deception, attention to detail, and understanding your adversary's psychology. The gravestone in Huelva has become a pilgrimage site for military historians and World War II enthusiasts. Tourists place flowers and pay respects to the man who never was, recognizing both the tragedy of Glinder Michael's lonely death and the extraordinary purpose to which his anonymous passing was put. The ethics of the operation remain complex. The use of a corpse for military purposes troubles some. The deception of neutral Spain violated diplomatic norms. The creation of a fictional fiancée, Pam, involved a real woman's photograph without her full understanding. But set against these concerns is an undeniable fact. The operation worked, and it saved lives. 15,000 is an estimate based on casualty modeling and comparison with similar operations. The true number can never be known with certainty. But every soldier who survived the Sicily landings, every family that received their loved one home after the war, benefited from a deception that made their survival possible. In warfare, that is perhaps the highest compliment one can pay to any operation, that it achieved its objective while minimizing the human cost. Major William Martin, who never lived, helped ensure that thousands of real soldiers did. Outro. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Stories of courage expressed not on the battlefield but through brilliant planning and creative deception. Stories of ordinary people, a homeless man, intelligence officers, theatrical designers whose contributions changed the course of history in ways they could never have imagined. Operation Mincemeat reminds us that wars are won not only through superior firepower and tactical brilliance, but through understanding your enemy's mind and making them believe the world you want them to see. The body that washed ashore in Spain that April morning carried more than documents. It carried hope for thousands of soldiers about to storm hostile beaches. It carried the weight of Allied strategy in the Mediterranean. It carried the future of the Italian campaign. And it succeeded beyond even its creator's most optimistic expectations. Subscribe to WW2 Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life. Because every soldier who fought, every life that was saved, every victory that was won, they all deserve to be remembered.